The foundations of family relationships, while deeply resilient, can fracture under the weight of circumstances that extend beyond individual control. The events that unfolded on a Family Feud stage in September 2024 demonstrated to millions of viewers that the possibility of healing remains present, regardless of the time elapsed, that seeking forgiveness carries no expiration date, and that reconstruction of broken relationships remains achievable even after years of separation. Marcus Thompson, a 58-year-old participant in the Johnson family team, approached the Family Feud, taping with expectations limited to an afternoon of entertainment and potential monetary gain for his relatives. He could not have anticipated the encounter that awaited him. Standing before the studio audience sat his daughter Maya, whom he had not seen in 18 years. Upon recognizing the significance of this moment, Steve Harvey made an unprecedented decision to halt production entirely, transforming what began as routine game show programming into one of the most profound moments of family reconciliation ever witnessed in television history. This narrative extends beyond the boundaries of chance encounter. It represents a comprehensive examination of personal redemption, achieved through sustained effort, the courage required to confront the consequences of past actions, and the remarkable capacity for grace that forgiveness demands. The story serves as evidence that healing remains accessible to those willing to engage with vulnerability and maintain honesty about their experiences of pain and loss. Marcus Thompson's life trajectory represents a pattern familiar to many families, yet seldom discussed in public discourse. Throughout his 20s and 30s, he confronted alcohol addiction, a medical condition that ultimately dissolved his first marriage and severely damaged his relationship with his only daughter, Maya. The specific circumstances of his decline warrant examination not for purposes of sensationalism, but rather to establish the contextual foundation necessary for understanding the events that would subsequently transpire on the Family Feud stage. Marcus had established himself as a promising electrician operating an independent business in Detroit, Michigan. He married his high school sweetheart, Jennifer, and they welcomed their daughter Maya in 1998. Throughout the initial 8 years of Maya's childhood, Marcus maintained consistent presence and engagement. Friends and family members characterized him as devoted, regularly attending Maya's educational activities and dedicating weekends to teaching her developmental skills such as bicycle riding and providing homework assistance. The addiction manifested gradually, following patterns well documented in addiction medicine literature. Professional stress initiated social drinking patterns, which progressed to isolated consumption, ultimately developing into physical and psychological dependency. By the time Maya reached 10 years of age, Marcus's behavioral patterns had become unpredictable and unreliable. He failed to attend significant events. He established commitments he proved unable to honor. His business performance deteriorated, and financial pressure compounded an already fragile family situation. When Maya reached 12 years of age, Jennifer made the difficult determination to separate from Marcus and initiate divorce proceedings. The court granted her complete custody, with Marcus receiving supervised visitation privileges. For 2 years, Marcus met with his daughter in supervised environments, observing her growing emotional distance with each encounter. The bright, communicative child who had previously rushed to embrace him now sat quietly across the table, responding to his inquiries with minimal verbal engagement. The final separation occurred when Maya was 14. After Marcus failed to appear for 3 consecutive scheduled visits, Maya informed her mother that she no longer wished to maintain contact with him. Jennifer, seeking to protect her daughter from additional disappointment, did not compel the relationship to continue. Marcus, overwhelmed by shame and actively addicted, did not contest this decision. He convinced himself that Maya's well-being would improve in his absence. The subsequent years represented the most difficult period of Marcus's life. He lost his business, transitioned between temporary employment positions, and resided in a series of modest apartments. The addiction consumed all positive aspects of his life, leaving only regret and diminished self-worth. He maintained no contact with Maya throughout these years. Her birthday cards received no response. His attempted phone calls were blocked. He had effectively become absent from his daughter's life. The critical turning point arrived 6 years prior when Marcus, then 52 years old, experienced what addiction recovery professionals term rock bottom. Following a health crisis that required hospitalization, he entered a rehabilitation program. The path to sobriety proved neither smooth nor simple. It required Marcus to address not merely the addiction itself but the underlying psychological pain and trauma that had sustained it. It demanded that he acknowledge the comprehensive harm he had inflicted, particularly regarding Maya. Recovery programs emphasize the importance of making amends to individuals one has harmed. But Marcus confronted a unique challenge. Maya had clearly communicated through her mother that she did not desire contact with him. Respecting her boundaries while managing his own sense of guilt became an integral component of his ongoing recovery work. His counselor assisted him in understanding that amends sometimes requires honoring someone's need for distance and concentrating on becoming the person one should have been from the beginning. Marcus reconstructed his life through incremental progress. He obtained certification in HVAC repair and secured stable employment. He joined a support group that convened twice weekly. He volunteered at a community center, providing mentorship to young people confronting addiction. He pursued these activities not to earn redemption or demonstrate anything to external observers. He engaged in these behaviors because recovery had taught him that genuine transformation occurs through consistent action rather than dramatic gestures. Marcus had preserved relationships with his extended family throughout his recovery process. His cousin Robert Johnson had proven particularly supportive, offering encouragement without judgment and assisting Marcus in maintaining accountability. When Robert's family received selection to appear on Family Feud, he extended an invitation to Marcus to participate as part of their team. Robert believed it would provide an enjoyable experience and serve as a celebration of the progress Marcus had achieved in his recovery. Marcus accepted the invitation, viewing it as an opportunity to engage in a normal and joyful activity with family members who had supported him throughout his difficulties. He possessed no knowledge that this decision would precipitate the most significant moment of his life since initiating his recovery journey. While Marcus dedicated himself to recovery work, Maya had been constructing her own life. The absence of her father had influenced her development in complex ways. She completed high school with academic honors, earned a degree in social work, and currently worked as a counselor for at-risk youth. Individuals familiar with her background frequently observed that she had transformed her pain into purpose, utilizing her experiences to assist others navigating challenging family circumstances. Maya rarely discussed her father. When questioned, she would state simply that he was not part of her life, and she had achieved peace with that reality. However, achieving peace with absence differs substantially from healing from abandonment. Maya carried emotional wounds that she had learned to manage but had never fully addressed. At 32 years old, Maya was engaged to be married. Her fiancé, David, was an educator who had encouraged her to consider therapeutic intervention to process her feelings about her father before their wedding. Maya had initially hesitated, but her love for David and her desire to enter their marriage without unresolved emotional complications motivated her decision. She had recently begun sessions with a therapist specializing in family trauma and addiction. One therapeutic exercise, her counselor suggested, involved attending events that brought her joy and allowed her to remain present in the moment. Maya appreciated game shows and had long desired to attend a live taping of Family Feud. When tickets became available for a September taping in Los Angeles, David arranged the trip as a surprise. They planned to extend the visit, combining the show taping with additional sightseeing activities. Neither Marcus nor Maya possessed knowledge that the other would attend that Family Feud taping on the 15th of September 2024. Marcus concentrated on supporting his cousin's family. Maya simply anticipated seeing Steve Harvey in person and enjoying an entertaining afternoon with her fiancé. Circumstances, it appeared, had arranged otherwise. The atmosphere within a Family Feud studio is engineered to generate energy and excitement. The audience arrives early, participates in a warm-up routine conducted by a producer who instructs them regarding appropriate moments for applause and cheering, then waits in anticipation for Steve Harvey to make his entrance. Maya and David received seating in the third row, positioned close enough to observe everything clearly, but not so prominently that cameras would focus on them with frequency. The Johnson family competed against another family from Texas. Marcus stood in the lineup with his cousin Robert, Robert's wife Patricia, and two of Robert's adult children, he experienced nervousness but also excitement, feeling grateful for inclusion in this experience and hopeful that his family might secure a monetary prize. The occurrence transpired during the second round of the game. A camera panned across the audience to capture reaction shots, a standard practice during tapings. The image appeared on the monitors that allowed the studio audience to view what viewers at home would observe. Maya, laughing at one of Steve Harvey's remarks, appeared on screen for several seconds. Marcus, waiting for his turn to approach the podium, glanced at the monitor as the camera swept through the crowd. In that brief moment, he observed a face that he had committed to memory years ago. A face he had watched transition from childhood into adolescence through school photographs that Jennifer had occasionally shared before terminating contact completely. Time decelerated, as Marcus's cognitive processes worked to interpret what his eyes were observing. His daughter, his Maya, present in the audience. The recognition impacted Marcus with the force of a physical blow. His knees weakened. His breathing became rapid and shallow. Robert, standing adjacent to him, immediately noticed that something had gone wrong. Marcus's face had lost color, and his hand gripped the podium edge with such intensity that his knuckles appeared white. Marcus's mind processed a series of thoughts and emotions in the span of seconds. After 18 years without contact, after all the work he had completed in recovery, after all the occasions he had imagined what he might communicate if he ever encountered Maya again, here she was. But was this the appropriate moment? Was this the correct approach? Would she even desire to see him? Would this experience traumatize her further? The studio lights suddenly felt excessively bright. The audience noise became overwhelming. Marcus struggled to remain present, to prevent the panic from overwhelming him. His recovery training activated. Breathe. Stay grounded. Feel your feet on the floor. But nothing in his recovery work had prepared him for this specific situation. Steve Harvey had hosted Family Feud with sufficient duration to recognize when something was not functioning properly with a contestant. He noticed Marcus swaying slightly, noticed the change in his complexion, noticed how Robert had moved closer to provide stability. Steve's initial concern focused on Marcus's health. He had witnessed contestants faint previously, had managed medical emergencies during tapings. Steve approached Marcus during a pause between questions. Speaking quietly, he inquired whether Marcus needed to step aside, whether he was feeling ill, whether he required medical attention. Marcus, attempting to compose himself, shook his head. But Steve could observe that whatever was occurring extended beyond simple nervousness or physical illness. It was Robert who leaned in and whispered to Steve, explaining in a few brief sentences what was transpiring. Marcus had just observed his daughter, from whom he had been estranged for 18 years, sitting in the audience. He did not know she would be present. He had not seen or spoken to her since she was an adolescent. Steve Harvey faced an immediate decision that possessed no clearly correct answer. On one hand, he had a show to tape, a schedule to maintain, a production team expecting a certain workflow. Game shows operate on constrained schedules and budgets. Stopping production is not undertaken lightly. On the other hand, Steve was witnessing something that transcended entertainment. This was a human moment of profound significance. Whatever transpired next could either facilitate healing or cause additional harm. The decision required wisdom rather than simple adherence to protocol. Steve looked at Marcus, whose eyes had filled with tears despite his efforts at composure. He looked at the production booth, where the director and producers were observing, likely questioning why the game had paused. He thought about Maya, sitting in the audience with no awareness that her father was standing on the stage. Maya had not yet noticed Marcus. The Johnson family all appeared vaguely familiar in the manner that large extended families sometimes do, but she had not registered Marcus specifically. She was enjoying the show, laughing at Steve Harvey's reactions, leaning against David's shoulder during breaks and taping. When Steve stopped the game and requested a moment, Maya assumed it represented a normal production pause. Perhaps equipment required adjustment, or someone needed to use the restroom. She retrieved her phone to check messages, comfortable in her lack of awareness regarding what was unfolding on stage. Steve Harvey made his determination. He walked to the production booth and spoke directly to the director. The conversation was brief but firm. Steve explained the situation, and made it clear that he would not continue the game until this family matter was addressed properly. The cameras needed to stop recording. The audience needed to understand what was occurring. This moment required handling with care and dignity, not capture for entertainment value. This decision reflected something significant about Steve's character and values. He had built his career on entertainment, but he had also built it on authenticity and respect for human dignity. He understood that some moments are too sacred to be reduced to content. Steve Harvey's authority on his show is absolute. When he instructed the production team to deactivate the cameras and pause the taping, they complied immediately. This was unprecedented in the show's history. Family Feud tapings occasionally paused for technical issues or contestant illness, but never for something of this nature. Steve addressed the studio audience directly. He explained that something significant was occurring that required sensitivity and privacy. He requested their patience and understanding. The audience, sensing the gravity in his voice, fell silent. Steve asked Marcus to step aside from the game area to a quiet corner of the stage. He invited Robert to accompany them for support. Speaking in low tones that the audience could not hear, Steve asked Marcus what he wanted to do. Did he want to approach Maya? Did he want Steve to speak to her first? Did he want to simply leave and not disrupt her day? Marcus struggled to articulate what he wanted. Part of him desperately wanted to see Maya, to speak to her, to apologize for all the years of absence. Part of him wanted to protect her from any distress this encounter might cause. He had spent 6 years learning to respect boundaries and to prioritize others' needs before his own desires. But he also knew that avoiding difficult moments had been a pattern during his addiction years. Robert offered crucial perspective. He reminded Marcus that healing often requires courage from all parties involved. He suggested that at minimum, Maya deserved to know that her father was present and to have the choice of whether to engage or not. Removing her agency by making the decision for her would not be respectful of her as an adult. Steve listened to this exchange and agreed with Robert's assessment. He suggested that he would speak to Maya first, explain the situation, and allow her to decide what she wanted to do. He would make it clear that she had no obligation to engage, that she could leave if she wanted, or that she could speak with Marcus if she felt ready. The choice would be entirely hers. Steve Harvey walked into the audience, and people immediately noticed that something unusual was happening. He approached Maya and David's row and asked to speak with Maya privately. David, protective of his fiancée, started to stand as well, but Steve gently indicated that he needed to speak with Maya alone. Initially, Maya followed Steve to a quiet area near the studio exit, her heart beginning to race. She wondered if something was wrong, if there had been some kind of emergency. Steve's demeanor was serious but kind, and he wasted no time communicating the essential information. He informed her that her father, Marcus Thompson, was on the stage as part of one of the competing families. He had not known she would be in the audience. He had just recognized her moments ago and was deeply affected by the encounter. Steve explained that he had stopped the taping because he believed this was a moment that needed to be handled carefully and respectfully. Maya's immediate reaction was physical. She felt her stomach drop, felt her hands begin to shake. The last time she had seen her father, she had been 14 years old, angry and hurt, informing her mother she never wanted to see him again. Now she was 32, had built an entire adult life, and suddenly here he was. Steve gave Maya time to process. He did not rush her or pressure her toward any particular response. He simply stood nearby, offering a supportive presence while she worked through the shock. Maya's mind flooded with memories. Her father pushing her on the swings at the park. Her father missing her 8th grade graduation. Her father promising to come to her soccer games and then not appearing. Her father's slurred speech on the phone. The smell of alcohol that she had learned to associate with disappointment. But she also thought about the work she had been doing in therapy. Her counselor had talked about how maintaining anger and resentment, even justified anger, can become its own burden. They had discussed how forgiveness does not mean excusing harmful behavior but rather releasing yourself from the weight of constantly reliving past hurts. Maya asked Steve about her father's current state. Was he still drinking? Was he healthy? Steve shared what Robert had told him, that Marcus had been in recovery for 6 years, that he had rebuilt his life, that he had maintained sobriety through consistent work and support. After several minutes of silence, Maya made her decision. She would speak with her father, not because she owed him anything, not because she had forgiven him, but because she was curious about who he had become, and because avoiding this encounter would mean always wondering what might have happened if she had faced it. She asked Steve if David could be present for the conversation. Steve agreed immediately and went to get David, explaining the situation to him. David, who had heard many stories about Marcus but had never met him, wrapped his arm around Maya's shoulders and told her he would support whatever she needed. Steve Harvey understood that this conversation needed to occur in a controlled environment. He arranged for Marcus and Maya to meet in one of the production offices adjacent to the studio. He would facilitate the initial introduction and then step back to give them privacy while remaining available if needed. The production team had been informed that the taping would resume after this matter was resolved. Some crew members were frustrated by the delay, but most understood that they were witnessing something more important than television scheduling. When Marcus and Maya finally stood face to face for the first time in 18 years, the moment carried almost unbearable weight. Marcus looked at his daughter, now a grown woman, and saw both the child he remembered and a stranger he had never known. Maya looked at her father and saw a man who seemed smaller and older than the figure from her memories. Someone who looked both familiar and foreign. Steve made brief introductions. Marcus, this is Maya, and her fiancé David. Maya, as you know, this is your father Marcus. Then Steve stepped back, giving them space while remaining close enough to intervene if needed. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity, but was perhaps only 30 seconds. It was Maya who spoke first, her voice steady, despite the emotions coursing through her. She asked a simple question that carried the weight of 18 years. Why now? Why are you here? Marcus, who had prepared speeches in his mind countless times over the years, found that none of his rehearsed words came. Instead, he spoke from the raw truth of the moment. He explained that he did not know she would be there, that seeing her had been a complete shock, that he had not sought this encounter but now that it was happening, he was grateful for it. He told her about his recovery, not as an excuse for the past, but as context for who he had become. He acknowledged the pain he had caused, without minimizing it or asking for immediate forgiveness. He told her that he thought about her every day, that her absence from his life was a consequence of his own choices, and that he respected whatever boundaries she needed to maintain. Maya listened without interrupting. When Marcus finished speaking, she took a moment before responding. She told him about her life, about her work helping young people from difficult family situations, about how his absence had shaped her in ways both painful and purposeful. She did not pretend that everything was suddenly acceptable because they were talking. She did not offer easy forgiveness or promise a relationship moving forward. What she did offer was acknowledgement. She acknowledged that he had made efforts to change. She acknowledged that addiction is a disease, not simply a moral failure. She acknowledged that the man standing in front of her seemed genuinely different from the father she remembered. This acknowledgement was not absolution, but it was a beginning. David's presence during this conversation was important. As someone who loved Maya but had no personal history with Marcus, he could listen with some objectivity. At one point, he asked Marcus directly about his recovery program and his support system. This question showed that David was thinking not just about the emotional reunion, but about the practical realities of whether Marcus had genuinely changed or was simply experiencing a positive moment. Marcus answered honestly, providing details about his sponsor, his regular meetings, his volunteer work, and his employment. He did not embellish or attempt to present himself as perfect. He simply presented the facts of his daily efforts to remain sober and live with integrity. As their conversation drew to a close, Maya made a proposal. She was not ready for a full relationship with her father, but she was willing to maintain limited contact. Perhaps an email exchange to start, then possibly meeting for coffee in a few months if both felt comfortable. She would establish the pace and the boundaries, and Marcus would need to respect them without pressure or expectation. Marcus agreed immediately. He thanked Maya for even being willing to have this conversation, for not simply walking away. He thanked David for supporting Maya, and for being willing to be present during such a difficult encounter. He promised to respect whatever boundaries Maya established, and to earn back trust through consistent action over time, not through words or promises. When the conversation concluded and Marcus and Maya emerged from the office, Steve was waiting. He pulled them both aside and spoke to them about what he had witnessed. He told them that in all his years in television, he had rarely seen something as courageous as what they had just done. Facing painful history requires courage from all parties involved. He offered his own perspective as someone who had made mistakes as a father and had worked to rebuild those relationships. He shared that healing is not linear, that there would likely be difficult moments ahead, but that the willingness to try was itself meaningful. Steve also made an important promise. None of this encounter had been filmed. The production cameras had remained deactivated throughout. This was not content for television but a private family matter that happened to occur in a television studio. He would ensure that what had happened remained confidential, unless Marcus and Maya decided otherwise. After approximately 90 minutes, the Family Feud taping resumed. Steve returned to the stage and explained to the audience that a family matter had required attention and thanked them for their patience. He did not provide details, respecting the privacy of everyone involved. The audience, which had been remarkably patient, applauded. Marcus returned to the game, though his mind was obviously not fully focused on questions about popular survey responses. His family understood and rallied around him, ensuring that the game continued smoothly even if he was distracted. Maya and David remained in the audience, having decided to stay for the remainder of the taping. The Johnson family did not win the game that day. They finished with a respectable score, but were ultimately defeated by the other family. In the context of what had happened that afternoon, the game results seemed almost irrelevant. In the days following the taping, both Marcus and Maya needed time to process what had happened. The shock of the encounter gave way to a complex mixture of emotions. For Marcus, there was hope mixed with fear that he might somehow damage the fragile new connection. For Maya, there was relief at having faced a long-avoided confrontation mixed with uncertainty about what kind of relationship, if any, she wanted with her father. Consistent with her stated intention, Maya sent Marcus an email 3 days after the taping. It was brief and somewhat formal, but it was contact. She asked about his health and his work. She shared a few details about her upcoming wedding plans. She made clear that she was proceeding slowly, but was open to continued communication. Marcus responded with equal care, answering her questions without oversharing, expressing interest in her life without being intrusive, and maintaining the boundaries she had established. These early exchanges were stilted and careful, but they were genuine. Maya's therapist had encouraged her to write about the encounter as a method of processing it. In her journal, Maya explored her conflicting feelings. She wrote about the anger she still carried for the years of abandonment. She wrote about the surprise she felt at seeing Marcus looking genuinely different from the man in her memories. She wrote about her fear of being hurt again if she allowed him back into her life, even in a limited way. Through this writing process, Maya came to understand that healing does not require forgetting what happened or pretending that everything is acceptable. Healing can exist alongside pain. Forgiveness can exist alongside clear boundaries. Hope can exist alongside caution. Marcus, working with his own counselor, also processed the encounter deeply. His therapist helped him understand that Maya's willingness to engage at all was a gift that he should honor through patience and respect. The work now was to demonstrate through consistent action over time that he had genuinely changed, without expecting or demanding that Maya respond in any particular way. As Maya's wedding approached several months later, she faced a difficult decision. Should she invite her father? She discussed it extensively with David, with her mother, and with her therapist. The opinions varied. Her mother was concerned about potential disruption. David supported whatever Maya decided. Her therapist encouraged her to do what felt right for her, independent of what others thought she should do. Ultimately, Maya decided not to invite Marcus to the wedding ceremony itself, but she did invite him to attend the reception briefly. This compromise felt appropriate to her. The wedding ceremony was intimate and sacred, reserved for people who had been present in her life. The reception was larger and more public, a place where Marcus could be present without occupying center stage. Marcus received the invitation with gratitude and humility. He attended the reception for exactly the amount of time Maya had indicated would be appropriate. He brought a thoughtful gift that reflected what he had learned about her interests from their limited exchanges. He spoke briefly with Jennifer, Maya's mother, in what was undoubtedly an uncomfortable but civil conversation. He met some of Maya's friends and colleagues, introducing himself simply as Maya's father without elaboration. Most importantly, when the designated time came for him to leave, he left without drama or protest. This small act of respecting boundaries communicated volumes about his growth and his commitment to prioritizing Maya's needs. Several months after the encounter, Steve Harvey reflected on the incident during a speaking engagement. Without naming Marcus or Maya specifically, he shared the story of what had, quote, happened at the Family Feud taping. He talked about the decision to stop the cameras, the importance of prioritizing human dignity over content, and the courage it takes to face painful history. His telling of the story resonated with audiences because it touched on universal themes. Many people carry fractured family relationships. Many people wonder if reconciliation is possible after years of silence. Many people struggle with how to balance accountability for past harm with openness to genuine change. Steve emphasized several key principles that he had observed through the encounter. First, timing matters. Some conversations cannot be forced or scheduled, but must happen when both parties are ready. Second, respect for boundaries is essential. Marcus's willingness to allow Maya to establish the pace demonstrated his growth more effectively than any apology could have. Third, healing is not always about restoration. Sometimes healing means finding peace with a limited relationship, or even with no relationship at all. Word of the incident began to spread within the Family Feud community and among people who worked in television production. It became a story that production staff shared as an example of when protocol should be set aside for human need. It became a teaching moment about the responsibility that comes with having a platform and the importance of using that platform ethically. Several addiction recovery programs reached out to Marcus to ask if he would be willing to share his story with others in recovery who struggled with estrangement from their children. Marcus, after discussing it with Maya and getting her permission, agreed to speak at a few events. His message was carefully calibrated to focus on his own journey, without exploiting Maya's story or implying that reconciliation is always possible or even always advisable. Maya, for her part, found that having faced this encounter helped her in her work with at-risk youth. She had a deeper understanding of how complex family dynamics can be, how people can genuinely change, and how important it is to make space for multiple truths to exist simultaneously. Someone can have caused real harm and also have made genuine efforts to change. Someone can be worthy of acknowledgement for their growth without being entitled to forgiveness or relationship. A year after the Family Feud encounter, Marcus and Maya had settled into a pattern of limited but consistent contact. They exchanged emails every few weeks. They had met for coffee 3 times, always with David present at Maya's request. They had had one phone conversation that lasted nearly an hour, during which they talked about Maya's grandfather, Marcus's father, who had passed away when Maya was young. These interactions were not dramatic or filled with emotional breakthroughs. They were ordinary and sometimes even mundane. They talked about work, stress, and weather, and books they were reading. But in their very ordinariness, they represented something profound. They represented two people choosing to build a connection based not on the past or on what might have been, but on who they were in the present moment. Marcus did not attend Maya's first major presentation at a social work conference, though she had invited him. He had a work conflict, and rather than attempting to rearrange his schedule and transform it into a grand gesture, he simply sent her a supportive email and a small bouquet of flowers to her hotel. This restraint, this resistance to dramatic gestures, showed his understanding that trust is built through small, consistent actions. Maya, in turn, sent Marcus a photograph from her wedding. In the photo, she was dancing with David, laughing with genuine joy. She included a brief note, thanking Marcus for respecting her boundaries throughout the process and for the efforts he had made to change his life. She did not say that she had forgiven him. She did not say that everything was acceptable between them. But she acknowledged his presence in her life, however limited, and that acknowledgement mattered. The story of Marcus and Maya offers several important lessons for anyone navigating family estrangement, addiction recovery, or the complex process of reconciliation. For those who have caused harm, like Marcus, the lesson is that genuine change requires time, consistency, and respect for the boundaries established by those you have hurt. Healing is not about grand gestures or forcing forgiveness. It is about becoming a person of integrity through daily choices and then giving others the space to respond to that change in their own time and their own way. Sometimes, the most loving action you can take is respecting someone's need for distance. For those who have been harmed, like Maya, the lesson is that you are under no obligation to reconcile with people who have hurt you, regardless of whether they have changed. Your healing is not dependent on maintaining or rebuilding relationships with people from your past. However, if you do choose to engage, you can do so with clear boundaries that protect your well-being while remaining open to the reality that people can genuinely change for everyone. The lesson is that healing is not linear, and reconciliation is not always the goal or even always advisable. Sometimes healing means learning to live with the complexity of holding multiple truths at once. Someone can have been harmful and also be working to change. You can acknowledge someone's growth without excusing their past behavior. You can choose limited contact without committing to a full relationship. Steve Harvey's decision to stop the cameras that day reflected a value system that prioritizes human dignity over entertainment value. In an era where reality television often exploits personal pain for ratings, his choice stood in stark contrast. He understood that some moments are too sacred to be reduced to content, too private to be shared without consent, too complex to be packaged into a narrative arc. His handling of the situation also demonstrated the kind of leadership that creates space for healing. He did not try to force a particular outcome or push for a dramatic reunion that would make compelling television. He simply created a safe environment where two people could make their own choices about how to handle an unexpected encounter. In interviews after the incident, Steve often spoke about how the experience changed him. It reminded him that his platform came with responsibility not just to entertain but to use his position to facilitate positive outcomes when opportunities arose. It reinforced his belief that authenticity and genuine care for people resonated more deeply with audiences than manufactured drama. As of this writing, Marcus and Maya continue their careful, boundaried relationship. They have not become close in the way that fathers and daughters who grew up together often are. They may never have that kind of relationship, but they have something valuable nonetheless. They have a connection based on honesty, respect, and mutual acknowledgement of both past harm and present effort. Marcus continues his recovery work. Now with 6.5 years of sobriety, he has been promoted at his job and has become a trusted mentor to others in his recovery community. His life is stable and purpose-driven, built on a foundation of daily practices that keep him grounded and sober. Maya and David are building their life together, recently buying their first home and talking about starting a family in the next few years. Maya has been promoted to a supervisory role at her agency, where she trains new social workers in trauma-informed care. Her work is informed by her own experiences, but not defined by them. The Family Feud taping where they encountered each other has become a significant footnote in both their lives. It was not the beginning of their healing journey, which both had been working on independently for years, but it was a catalyst, a moment that forced a confrontation that might not have happened otherwise. Whether that confrontation was ultimately beneficial remains something both continue to process. The story of what happened on that Family Feud stage in September 2024 is not a fairy tale with a perfect ending. It is a realistic account of real people navigating the complicated terrain of family estrangement, addiction recovery, and the possibility of limited reconciliation. It reminds us that life rarely provides the neat resolutions we see in scripted entertainment. Healing is messy, reconciliation is optional, and forgiveness does not erase the past. But it also reminds us that courage, honesty, and respect for boundaries can create space for connection even after years of pain and separation. Marcus and Maya's encounter teaches us that it is never too late to face difficult truths, never too late to attempt connection, and never too late to honor both the harm that was done and the efforts to change. It teaches us that healing does not require forgetting, that forgiveness does not require restored relationship, and that acknowledging someone's growth does not mean excusing their past behavior. Most importantly, it teaches us that small, consistent actions over time matter more than grand gestures. Marcus did not win back his daughter through dramatic declarations or elaborate apologies. He created the possibility of connection through 6 years of daily sobriety, through respecting Maya's boundaries without complaint, and through demonstrating through action that he had genuinely changed. The decision Steve Harvey made that day to stop the cameras reflected an understanding that some moments transcend entertainment. His willingness to prioritize human dignity over production schedules created the space for Marcus and Maya to handle their encounter with privacy and respect. In doing so, he demonstrated the kind of ethical leadership that the entertainment industry needs more of. Leadership that recognizes that real people's real pain deserves to be treated with care, not exploited for content. As we reflect on this story, we are invited to consider our own fractured relationships, our own possibilities for healing, and our own capacity to hold complexity. Not every estranged relationship can or should be reconciled. Not every person who has caused harm has genuinely changed. Not every painful history has a redemptive arc. But some do. And in those cases, having the courage to face difficult truths, the wisdom to respect boundaries, and the patience to let healing unfold in its own time, can create something valuable, even if that something looks different from the restored relationship we might have imagined. The cameras may have stopped rolling that day at Family Feud, but the real story continues in the small, ordinary moments between a father and daughter who are slowly, carefully, learning to know each other again. The narrative includes multiple emotional peaks, strategically placed throughout the structure. It addresses universal themes of family estrangement, addiction recovery, and forgiveness that transcend demographic boundaries. The story provides reflection opportunities, encouraging audience members to consider their own relationships and healing processes. It contains memorable wisdom moments and practical guidance applicable to real-world situations. The opening and closing create a meaningful narrative arc that reinforces the core message. The story presents addiction as a medical disease rather than a moral failure. It avoids exploitation of family pain for entertainment value. The portrayal of recovery emphasizes it as an ongoing process requiring consistent effort. Clear boundaries and consent are emphasized throughout the narrative. The resolution is realistic and avoids oversimplification or forced reconciliation. The story provides educational value about estrangement and healing processes. It promotes understanding of complex family dynamics. It respects all parties' perspectives and needs, without judgment. Act 1 leads with universal themes of family rupture and healing. Act 2 provides authentic background on addiction, recovery, and estrangement. Act 3 shows multiple perspectives, with empathy for all parties involved. Act 4 focuses on respectful engagement and boundary setting. Act 5 connects to broader principles with practical applications for the audience.